Welcome to this trip through one of the most disturbing cases in Devil's Den, Arkansas's history. Please leave a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is when you listen to this narration. We want to know where and when these documented stories are being told. In 1904, Devil's Den was just a few small homes spread out over the rough terrain of the Boston Mountains in northwestern Arkansas. The settlement got its name not because of any specific evil that lived there, but because the jagged rocks cast long, scary shadows across the valleys when the sun went down. The Oklahoma Territory was to the west, and the White River was to the east. It was a place of breathtaking natural beauty that hid a darkness that few would ever understand. Washington County records show that families moved to Devil's Den in the 1,830 to live alone and be self-sufficient in the wild. By 1904, not much had changed. It was still a place where people lived miles apart and were connected by rough dirt roads that were almost impossible to use during the rainy seasons. Fayetteville, which is about 30 miles to the northeast, was the closest town of any size. It would take most of a day to get there by wagon over the mountain roads. The 17th of April 1904 is when the story of Eliza Thornwood begins, but the events that would later be called the Devil's Den incident had been set in motion years before. County records show that Eliza was married to Harold Thornwood, a well-known timber merchant who had made a small fortune selling lumber to the railroads that were expanding through the Ozarks. Their home was different from the others. It was a two-story building made of dark wood and sat against limestone bluffs about 3 miles from what was then the town center. It's not just what happened in this case that is so disturbing. It's also how well it was documented and then hidden. Dr. James Calloway, a historian at the University of Arkansas, found a number of documents while looking into the folklore of the Ozarks in 1964. These papers had parts of Eliza's personal diary, reports from the county sheriff, and notes from the medical examiner that were only partially destroyed. Dr. Calloway's records show that his research was suddenly cut off, and the materials were put away in the university's special collections, where they mostly stayed forgotten until a microfiche copy was found during a library renovation in 1968. People in the area thought the Thornwoods were private but good people. Harold's business dealings put him in touch with railway officials and timber brokers from as far away as St. Louis. Eliza, on the other hand, stayed to herself. Former neighbors who were interviewed for Dr. Calloway's research said that she was too educated for her station and had strange habits. Before she got married, she was said to have worked as a nurse's aide for a short time in Little Rock. This medical background would later turn out to be important. Washington County land records show that the Thornwood property had almost 40 acres of woods and rocky land. The house itself was big for the area, with 2 stories and a basement that was only partially dug out of the limestone bedrock. It is said that Harold designed the house himself and included some strange features that people would later wonder about. One of these was a reinforced storage room next to his study that locals called his private museum of geological specimens that he had collected while the Crawford mine was in operation. The marriage of Harold and Eliza looked normal on the outside, but there were some strange things about it that their neighbors noticed. They had been married for 5 years by 1904, but they still didn't have any kids. According to local reports, this caused a lot of stress. Harold was 15 years older than Eliza. They met in Little Rock in 1898 when he was on a business trip and was a widower. In 1897, his first wife, Catherine, died in a way that was not completely clear. The official cause of death was brain fever, but there were still rumors that she had killed herself. There was never any proof that these rumors were true, and Harold's reputation in the community stayed strong. People were surprised that he married Eliza less than a year after Catherine died, but most people agreed that it was the smart thing for a successful businessman who needed a partner at home to do. People still didn't know much about Eliza's life before she married Harold. Records show that she was born Eliza Chamberlain in Springfield, Missouri in 1872. Her father was a pharmacist. She got an unusually good education for a woman of her time. She went to a women's seminary in St. Louis until 1892. She worked for a short time at a hospital in Little Rock between 1892 and her marriage to Harold Thornwood in 1899. A co-worker from this time, who Dr. Calloway interviewed in 1964, said she was very careful when she made observations and was especially good at writing down patient symptoms. This training may help explain why Eliza wrote such detailed diary entries about what she saw at the Crawford mine. Her descriptions make it sound like she knows a lot about medical terms and is used to writing down exact observations. This same level of detail may have led people to think her claims were those of an overworked mind. Her stories just seemed too crazy to be true. Dr. Richard Merriweather, the doctor who worked with Eliza in Little Rock, wrote a letter in 1900 that was found among her personal belongings. It said, "Mrs. Thornwood has an analytical mind and observational skills that would serve her well in the medical profession, were such opportunities more readily available to women. During her time under my supervision, she demonstrated an exceptional ability to notice details others might overlook. Her documentation of patient conditions was invariably more thorough than that of her peers." Eliza told Sheriff Thomas Blackwood on that April morning in 1904 that she had seen something strange at the abandoned Crawford mine, which was about a mile from her house. The mine closed in 1897 after 3 workers died in a collapse, but Eliza said that she had seen strange things happening and men bringing strange tools into the mine entrance at night. The Crawford mine was built in 1881 during a short time when people were looking for minerals in the Boston Mountains. The Crawford venture did not make as much money as other mining operations in Arkansas. Instead, it mostly produced low-grade limestone and small amounts of lead. This was not what its investors had hoped for. After the deadly collapse in 1897, the entrance was partially blocked with wooden bracing, and the property was thought to be abandoned. Sheriff Blackwood's report from the 18th of April 1904 says, "Mrs. Thornwood seems upset and talks at length about things she says she saw at the old Crawford site. Her description is not clear, and her husband says she has been having trouble sleeping. No investigation is needed at this time." The report goes on to say, Mrs. Thornwood insists she saw a wagon arrive at the mine entrance shortly after midnight on April 16. She says she saw 3 men unloading crates and what she called medical apparatus into the mine. When asked why she was out at such an hour, she said she had been drawn from her bed by strange sounds. Her story includes details that suggest a disturbed imagination rather than credible observation. This would be the first of many dismissals. In the weeks that followed, Eliza's claims became more frequent and serious. The sheriff's log says she went back to his office at least 7 times between April and June. Every time, her observations got more detailed, and the authorities thought they were less likely to be true. A letter from Harold Thornwood to Sheriff Blackwood, dated May 3, 1904, reads, "I must apologize for my wife's continued disruptions. The physician suggests her nervous condition stems from a female complaint exacerbated by our inability to produce children. I assure you I am seeking appropriate care for her condition." The letter continues with a concerning request. "Should she appear at your office again, I would appreciate being notified immediately. Dr. Phillips advises against indulging her fantasies about the old mine, as it only serves to deepen her delusions. In confidence, I must tell you that her condition has reached a point where more stringent measures may soon become necessary." What makes this case so disturbing is how Eliza's testimony changes from reporting suspicious behavior to documenting what she called proof of horrible behavior. Dr. Calloway found parts of her diary that said she started doing her own investigations in late May. She went to the mine site during the day to get what she thought was evidence. An entry from May 27 says, "They think I'm crazy, but I know what I've seen. Today, I collected samples from outside the mine entrance. Soil with a strange color and an odor I recognize from my time helping Dr. Merriweather in Little Rock. The material looks like what happens when internal tissues are exposed to air for a long time. I put the samples in jars and hid them under the floorboards of the root cellar." A later entry from May 29th suggests that Eliza's investigation went beyond just watching. "I followed the wagon tracks today. They don't lead to town. They lead to the old river crossing near Blackburn's farm. The ferry operator must be in on it. The tracks continue on the eastern shore toward Fayetteville. What are they carrying? And where do they get their subjects?" As Eliza's investigations go on, the diary's tone becomes more and more upset. On June 2nd, she writes, "From the ridge above Simmons Creek, I have been watching the mine entrance. With H's field glasses, I can see clearly, without being seen. Today, a different wagon arrived, larger and with a canvas covering. Two men I didn't know unloaded what looked like a large wooden crate, but it took both of them to carry it, which suggests it was very heavy. They were inside for about 3 hours before coming out without the crate. What is still in that mine, and why does it need to be delivered at night?" By the beginning of June, things between Eliza and her husband had gotten a lot worse. In 1964, a neighbor named Martha Simmons told Dr. Calloway, "Mr. Thornwood began to speak of his wife's condition in hushed tones. He invited a specialist from Fort Smith to examine her. The day the doctor came, we could hear her protests from across the property. She didn't come out of the house for nearly 2 weeks after." Mrs. Simmons went on, "My husband John encountered Harold at the general store during this period. Harold confided that Eliza had become obsessed with the old mine, claiming it was being used for some sort of secret medical experiments. John thought little of it at the time. Everyone knew the mine had been abandoned for years. But later, John said he had been hunting in that area and had seen fresh wagon tracks leading to the mine entrance. This made Harold angry, and he ended the conversation right away." The medical report from this visit, signed by a Dr. I.M. Edmund Phillips of Fort Smith, contains this clinical assessment. Patient exhibits signs of delusional paranoia, likely stemming from prolonged isolation and unfulfilled maternal instincts. Recommend regular doses of bromide and a consideration of temporary placement in a suitable facility for women suffering from nervous conditions. The report elaborates. Patient insists she has witnessed clandestine activities at an abandoned mine near her residence. Her descriptions are elaborate, but bear the hallmarks of hysterical invention. Impossible medical procedures, mysterious substances, and conspiracies involving prominent members of the community. When confronted with the implausibility of her claims, she becomes increasingly agitated rather than reconsidering her position. This reinforces my diagnosis of a mind unmoored from rational thought. Dr. Calloway looked into Dr. Phillips's background and found that he had only studied medicine for a short time in Chicago before opening his practice in Fort Smith in 1899. His area of expertise was female nervous disorders, a catch-all term used to describe women who acted in ways that were considered inappropriate or difficult for the time. The next thing that happened was the turning point in this dark story. Instead of going through treatment or being locked up, Eliza seems to have chosen to gather evidence that couldn't be ignored. Her diary says that on the night of June 18th, she waited until Harold was asleep before sneaking out of their house with a Brownie camera she had ordered from Sears, Roebuck & Company by mail. Kodak's Brownie camera, which came out in 1900, made photography available to everyone, not just professionals. The Eliza model probably used 117 film and made negatives that were 2¼ by 2¼ inches, which were small but clear enough to show what she wanted to capture. The diary entry from June 19th is particularly disturbing. I positioned myself behind the limestone outcropping with a clear view of the mine entrance. At approximately 11:40, a wagon arrived without lanterns. 3 men unloaded what appeared to be medical equipment, similar to what I had seen in the surgical ward in Little Rock. A 4th man emerged from the mine. His clothes were stained dark. I exposed 4 plates before they departed near dawn. What they carried out was wrapped in oilcloth and roughly the size of a man. The entry continues with a troubling observation. I recognized one of them, the tallest man with the distinctive gait. It was Mr. Garrett, supposedly a timber buyer from Street Louis. Harold has dined with him on 3 occasions since April. They are connected to this somehow. I must develop the plates immediately. County records show that a man named William Garrett, who worked as a purchasing agent for the Street, Louis and San Francisco Railroad, also known as the Frisco Line, visited the area several times in the spring of 1904. His official job was to get timber rights for the railroad to grow, and he had written records of meetings with several local landowners, such as Harold Thornwood. We still don't know what happened to these photo plates. Dr. Calloway did not find them in the materials he found, but what happened next makes it seem like Eliza may have really caught something important and dangerous. A receipt found among Harold Thornwood's business papers shows that he hired someone to build a small dark room next to his study in 1902. The room was supposed to be used for developing pictures of geological specimens. This suggests that he may have known about or even been involved in his wife's efforts to document, even though he publicly denied them. Another diary entry from June 20th raises more questions about Harold's role. H found the exposed plates I had hidden in my sewing basket. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. Not anger, but calculation. He left right away, taking the plates with him. When he came back hours later, he acted like nothing had happened. The plates were not returned. I am afraid my position has become precarious. Sheriff Blackwood heard from Harold Thornwood on June 22nd that his wife was missing. He said in the report that when he woke up, her side of the bed was empty and her walking shoes and shawl were missing. There was a search party, but after 2 days of searching the area around the house, they found nothing. About 20 men from the area helped look for Eliza Thornwood. Sheriff Blackwood's report says that they mostly looked at the eastern ridges and the path that led to the nearest property, which was about 2 miles away. The area around the Crawford mine was not included in the search parameters, which would later raise questions about how thorough the effort was. Thomas Jackson, one of the men who participated in the search, provided this account to Dr. Calloway in 1964. We were specifically instructed to avoid the western valley where the old mine was located. When I asked Sheriff Blackwood about this, he said the area had been searched privately by Mr. Prode. Thornwood himself, and was deemed too dangerous for the rest of us due to the unstable mine entrance. I found this odd, as Mr. Thornwood was coordinating the eastern search with us and couldn't have searched the mine area simultaneously. Jackson added a detail that did not appear in any official records. During the second day of searching, one of the men, I believe it was young Robert Collins, mentioned he had seen smoke rising from the direction of the mine the previous evening. Sheriff Blackwood dismissed this as likely a campfire set by a hunter, but I remember Harold's face went pale at the mention. Nothing came of it, though. We never searched that area. 3 days after she went missing, on June 25, Eliza Thornwood showed up again. This time, she was not at home, but at the Northwest Arkansas Times office in Fayetteville, which is about 30 miles from Devil's Den. The newspaper's logbook says she showed up shortly after noon and asked to talk to the editor about an issue of public safety related to illegal medical testing. The trip from Devil's Den to Fayetteville would have been hard, especially for a woman going alone. The most direct route took you over rough mountain trails before you got to the main road. We still don't know how Eliza made this trip. No stagecoach or train company said they took her, which means she either walked a long way or got a ride that wasn't recorded. Later, a clerk at the newspaper office told the police that Eliza had come with a small leather bag that she kept a close eye on. No one ever officially wrote down what was in this satchel, but some people think it might have had the photographic plates or other evidence she had collected. No later reports about her return to Devil's Den mentioned the satchel. Rebecca Wilson, the newspaper clerk, told Dr. Calloway this. Mrs. Thornwood was calm but insistent. She only wanted to talk to Mr. Simmons and waited almost an hour for him to come back from lunch. When they did talk, it was behind closed doors for about 40 minutes. When they came out, Mr. Simmons looked pale. He immediately sent a telegram to someone, I assumed the authorities. Mrs. Thornwood sat quietly in the waiting area until her husband arrived. She didn't protest when he took her arm to lead her out, but she left the satchel with Mr. Simmons, saying only, "Keep it safe until we speak again." There is no record of her talking to James Simmons, the editor of the newspaper, but the paper never published any stories about her claims. However, it is known that by the end of the day, both the county sheriff and Harold Thornwood had been told where she was. Harold got there just before 6 p.m. to pick up his wife. Dr. Calloway found telegraph records from the Fayetteville office that showed James Simmons sent 2 messages that afternoon. The first one was sent to Sheriff Blackwood to let him know that Eliza was there. The second, on the other hand, went to Dr. Raymond Finch at the State Medical Society in Little Rock. No one has ever found the contents of this telegraph, but things that happened later suggest that it may have had something to do with what Eliza had said. We can put together what happened over the next 2 weeks from bits and pieces of Eliza's diary. It looks like she was stuck at home. An entry from July 3rd says, H has taken down the door to my room and thrown away my outdoor clothes. Dr. P comes every day to give me the tincture that makes my thoughts cloudy. They have taken my samples and photographic plates. When I mentioned the newspaper, H told me that editor Simmons knows how important it is not to publish hysterical claims that would hurt the reputation of well-known businessmen. Another entry from July 5th sounds more and more paranoid. They speak in hushed voices outside my door. I have heard unfamiliar voices, men who are not from here. They believe I sleep, but the doses have become less effective. I am remembering to appear sedated while remaining alert. There was mention of relocation and the facility. I believe they intend to move me elsewhere. The entry continues. Last night, I heard H arguing with someone, a man whose voice I did not recognize. The man said, "The situation has become untenable. She has spoken to the newspaper." H replied, "Simmons has been handled. There will be no story." Then the man said something that chilled me to the bone. "The work at the mine is too important to risk exposure. The advances we've made cannot be compromised by one woman's hysteria. What are they doing in that mine, and why are they so determined to silence me?" The entry from July 7th is the most frightening. It says, "I recognized one of them today. The man who came to give me my medication was the same man I saw entering the mine on June 18th. He smiled when he saw that I recognized him. We have never been able to say for sure who this man is. Dr. Calloway's research did find a possible candidate, though. In late June 1904, a doctor, Walter Kingsley, came to the area to study diseases that were common there. His credentials showed that he was connected to a medical research institution in Philadelphia, but Dr. Calloway couldn't find any evidence that such an institution actually existed when he looked into it further. Hotel records in Fayetteville and purchases made at a local pharmacy show that Dr. Kingsley was in the area. These records show that he stayed in the area until mid-July and left soon after the fire at the Thornwood house. There has never been a picture of Dr. Kingsley, and there is no official record of him talking to either of the Thornwoods. A final diary entry from July 10th shows that Eliza was losing hope. "I understand now that what I have seen will never be believed. The truth exists in a place beyond my reach. They have constructed a narrative in which I am already dead. My words, the product of a disturbed mind. My evidence, dismissed as fabrication. Perhaps in another time someone will hear my voice through these pages. If these words are found, know this: what happens in the Crawford mine violates all natural law and human decency. They seek to extend what should not be extended, to preserve what should naturally decay. The techniques they develop there will eventually reach beyond our mountains into hospitals and battlefields, where life and death are daily commodities." The entry ends with a very disturbing observation. "Last night I heard a sound I recognized from my time in the hospital, the unmistakable whir of a bone saw. It came not from the mine, but from H's study below. What, or who, is he dissecting in our home? I have barricaded my door as best I can, but I fear it will not hold for long." A fire started at the Thornwood home on the 12th of July, 1904. When neighbors got there to help, the building was already on fire. When Harold Thornwood tried to save his wife, who was said to be sedated in an upstairs bedroom, he got very badly burned. 3 days later, he died from his injuries at Washington County Hospital in Fayetteville. The coroner's report says that a body thought to be Eliza's was found in the rubble, but it was never positively identified. It was found that the fire started in the basement of the house, in the same place where Eliza had said she hid her samples in the root cellar. The fire inspector's report says that the fire spread at an unusually fast rate, which could mean that accelerants were present. This decision was later changed to say that the quick spread was caused by the house's wooden structure and a very dry summer. Thomas Crave, one of the neighbors who responded to the fire, provided this account to Dr. Calloway. "By the time we arrived, the lower floor was completely consumed. Harold was outside, badly burned. He kept pointing to an upstairs window, saying Eliza was still inside. Several of us tried to enter, but the heat was unbearable. The entire structure collapsed within 20 minutes, faster than any house fire I've ever witnessed. Crave added a detail that did not appear in any official reports. The strange thing was, Harold didn't come from the house when we arrived. He emerged from the tree line to the west, as if he'd been returning to the property when the fire broke out. Yet he was badly burned, his clothing singed. It never made sense to me how he could have been injured by the fire if he wasn't in the house when it started. Sarah Jenkins, another neighbor, told Dr. Calloway something strange that she remembered. When we got to Thornwood Place that night, I saw something strange. There was already a wagon hitched and loaded with trunks and crates at the edge of the property, even though there was chaos and flames. It looked like someone had been getting ready to leave before the fire started. I forgot about it in the confusion that followed, but by morning, the wagon was gone. If nothing else had happened, the matter would have ended there, with a tragic house fire that killed 2 people. 3 men connected to the Thornwood case died in the weeks after the fire. At the time, there weren't many questions about how they died, but now they seem suspicious. It looks like Dr. Edmund Phillips died from an overdose of morphine he gave himself in his office in Fort Smith. Sheriff Thomas Blackwood died in an accident while checking out the old Crawford mine. The official cause of death was a fall in the unstable structure. James Simmons, the editor of the Northwest Arkansas Times, drowned while fishing on the White River. At the time, officials saw these deaths, which happened over the course of about 3 weeks, as separate tragedies. Dr. Calloway's research 60 years later was the only way to find out how these men were connected to the Thornwood case. The investigation into the fire at the Thornwood house was not very thorough. The county fire inspector's report says that the fire was probably caused by an accident with a kerosene lamp. It also says that the woman's mental state may have made her careless with open flames. For almost 50 years, the strange things that happened in Devil's Den were hidden away, both literally and figuratively. Dr. James Calloway started gathering oral histories from older people living in Washington County in 1963 as part of his study of Ozark folklore. A few of these interviews mentioned the woman who saw too much and the doctors at the mine. Dr. Calloway was interested and did more research, which led him to the broken records that make up this story. His notes show that he was especially interested in property records for the Crawford mine. He found out that the Northwestern Medical Research Association, a business, had quietly bought the empty lot in March 1904, just a month before Eliza first reported strange behavior. After looking into it more, it turned out that this group was not officially connected to any well-known medical institution. Dr. Calloway did, however, find letters that suggested ties to some doctors who had been discredited by the American Medical Association for doing unethical experimental procedures. In a letter to a co-worker from September 1963, Dr. Calloway said, "The more I look into the Thornwood case, the more I believe that something very wrong happened in Devil's Den in 1904. The systematic killing of witnesses, the mine's purchase by a shell organization, and the convenient fire that killed Eliza and destroyed her evidence all point to a coordinated effort to hide actions that were probably unethical and illegal at the time. We don't know for sure what these experiments were like. Eliza's diary contains vague references to surgical methods and preservation methods that she found upsetting. In one entry that is especially hard to understand, she writes, "They seek to extend what should not be extended. The natural order disrupted by men who believe themselves beyond God's limitations." Some historians have said that the Crawford mine may have been used for early tests of tissue preservation or surgical methods that were too controversial to be done in established medical facilities. The early 1900s were a time of quick progress in medical science, but there wasn't much ethical oversight at the time. In 1964, Dr. Calloway's research came to an abrupt end when his funding was cut off without warning. He thought that this had something to do with his questions about the Northwestern Medical Research Association, which he had learned had ties to a number of important families in the area. On the 12th of November 1964, the university administration sent Dr. Calloway a letter that said, "The committee has reviewed your current research agenda and determined that funds would be better allocated to projects with more substantial historical merit. Your investigation into rural folklore, and, specifically, The so-called Devil's Den incident is deemed insufficiently academic in nature and unlikely to contribute meaningfully to historical scholarship. We recommend you redirect your efforts toward more productive avenues of research. Dr. Calloway wrote on this letter, "They've been reached. Someone still cares very much about what happened in that mine." Dr. Calloway's last notes on the subject said, "What happened to Eliza Thornwood is more than a personal tragedy. It shows how weak truth is when faced with power." Her voice was systematically silenced, first dismissed as hysteria, then physically contained, and finally extinguished altogether. The men she accused died conveniently soon after hers, which suggests that her claims may have been more important than history has recognized. After heavy spring rains in 1957, the Crawford mine collapsed completely, burying any secrets it may have held. The forest took back the land where the Thornwood house once stood, leaving only the stone foundation as proof that it was there. A graduate student who was helping to organize Dr. Calloway's papers after his death found the microfilmed records of his Devil's Den research in 1968. A quick look at these papers was all that was needed before they were put into the university's special collections. Library records show that they were only checked out once in 1969 by a researcher whose name has been crossed out in the log. The case of Eliza Thornwood is especially disturbing, not only because she may have uncovered real atrocities, but also because her findings were systematically discredited and eventually erased. Because she was a woman, people at the time thought that women were mentally ill, and the people she accused were well known. It was easy for the truth to be buried with her. The parts of her diary that are still around show that she was very aware of how weak she was. Now I know that what I saw will never be believed. The truth is out of my reach. They have made up a story in which I am already dead. My words are the product of a disturbed mind. My evidence has been dismissed as fake. Maybe someone will hear my voice through these pages in another time. For a long time, the story of Eliza Thornwood was just a rumor among the oldest people in Washington County. The woman who saw too much. No one believed the woman until it was too late. In 1967, during an oral history project separate from Dr. Calloway's research, an elderly resident of the area, who had been a young boy in 1904, provided this account. "My father was among those who searched for Mrs. Thornwood when she was reported missing. He told me years later that the search had been deliberately misdirected. The sheriff had them combing the eastern ridges even though a local hunter had reported seeing smoke from the old mine in the western valley. My father always believed they weren't meant to find her, at least not while she might still speak." Another local account, recorded in 1965, comes from a woman who had worked briefly as a housemaid for the Thornwoods in early 1904. Mrs. Thornwood had a precise mind. She kept detailed records of everything. Household accounts, weather patterns, wildlife sightings, not the actions of someone prone to fantasy or confusion. What always stayed with me was how her manner changed after she began watching the mine. It wasn't fear I saw in her eyes, it was certainty. The woman continued, "There was tension in that house long before Mrs. Thornwood began making her claims about the mine. I noticed Mr. Thornwood would often receive visitors late in the evening, men who never came through the front door but would be seated in his study when I brought coffee. They spoke in hushed tones, and the conversations would cease immediately when I entered. Once I overheard mention of progress despite limitations and specimens requiring special handling. I assumed they were discussing his timber business, but in retrospect, I wonder. Most of the physical evidence in the case is no longer there. The photographic plate she exposed on June 18th has never been found. Nature has even taken back the site of the Crawford mine, and most locals can't even remember where it used to be. What is left are questions that have been asked for more than 100 years. What did Eliza Thornwood see that night in June 1904? Why were those involved in the case so easily silenced? And maybe the most disturbing thing is what work was going on in that abandoned mine that needed so much secrecy and protection. County records contain the architectural plans for the Thornwood home, which show an interesting detail that none of the official reports mention. There was a dark room next to Harold's study in the house that was built just for developing photographic plates. This suggests that Harold Thornwood may have known about or even been involved in his wife's efforts to document things, even though he publicly denied them. Dr. Calloway's review of Harold Thornwood's business records revealed another strange detail. In February 1904, just 2 months before Eliza first reported activity at the mine, Harold ordered a large amount of chemicals that are usually used in photography and preserving specimens. The bill from a street Louis Pharmaceutical Supply Company included formaldehyde, silver nitrate, and a few other chemicals that didn't seem to have anything to do with the timber business. The 15th of July 1904, article from the Northwest Arkansas Times, 3 days after the fire, includes this short obituary. Harold Thornwood, age 42, successful businessman and respected member of the community, succumbed to injuries sustained while heroically attempting to save his wife from their burning home. He is survived by his brother, Dr. Wilson Thornwood of Street Lewis. No previous mention of this brother appears in any local records, and subsequent research by Dr. Calloway failed to locate any physician by that name practicing in Street Louis during that period. Perhaps the most unsettling discovery among Dr. Calloway's papers is a partial transcript of an interview conducted in 1964 with an elderly man identified only as former employee, Crawford Mining Operation. The man, who would have been in his 82nds at the time of the interview, provided this account. Those of us who worked the day shifts were told the night operations were related to testing new drilling techniques. But we noticed things: equipment that had no place in a mining operation, unusual waste that had to be disposed of. Most concerning were the shipments that arrived labeled as mining chemicals but were addressed to doctors, not mining engineers. After the collapse in '97, I thought it was finished. Then in '04, I heard they had reopened portions of the mine, not for extracting ore, for something else. The interview abruptly ends mid-sentence with a notation from Dr. Calloway that the interview subject refused to continue and asked that his comments be stricken from the record. In 1969, renovations to the Washington County Hospital revealed a sealed records room that held medical files from the early 1900s. This was the last piece of this disturbing puzzle. One of these was a partial patient registry from 1904 that had an entry for July 12, the day of the Thornwood fire. It says that a patient named Jane Smith was admitted with extensive burns, transferred from Devil's Den area. The doctor who treated her is listed as W. Thornwood. There is no date for this patient's discharge. There is only one word written in the margin: relocated. The handwriting is the same as what was found in Sheriff Thomas Blackwood's reports. Was Jane Smith really Eliza Thornwood? Had she lived through the fire, only to be taken away by the people she had accused? The records don't give a clear answer. They just give us another disturbing possibility in a case where there is official silence and missing evidence. A retired nurse who worked at Washington County Hospital in the early 1900s told researchers in 1968, "I remember the burn patient from the Devil's Den fire. She was kept in a private room at the end of the East Wing with a guard posted, which was unusual for any patient. We were told she was severely disfigured and sensitive to visitors. Only one doctor was allowed to treat her, an outside specialist, not one of our regular staff. After about a week, I arrived for my shift to find her room empty. When I asked, the head nurse said only that the patient had been transferred to a specialized facility. No paperwork was processed through the normal channels." The nurse, who wanted to remain anonymous even during the 1968 interview, added this disturbing detail: "I only saw her once, when I was called to help change her bandages. Her burns were very bad. But what struck me was her eyes. They were fully alert and filled with what I can only describe as a desperate awareness. She tried to talk to me when the doctor left, but I could barely hear her. All I could make out was, not my husband, not his brother." Before she could say anything else, the doctor came back. I was never assigned to her again. The graduate student who found Dr. Calloway's research in 1968 looked into it more and found another interesting link. According to records from a Street Louis hospital, A private sanitarium called the Westbrook Institute for Nervous Disorders took in a new patient with severe burn injuries in late July 1904. The patient, who was only known as E.T., stayed at the facility until it closed in 1912. We don't know what happened to this patient after that. Business records show that the Westbrook Institute was started in 1899 with money from a group of well-known doctors and business people, including a large investment from a group of timber companies that worked with Harold Thornwood's business partners. The Institute's main focus was on helping women who had been diagnosed with different types of hysteria and nervous exhaustion. These were common catch-all diagnoses for women who acted in ways that were considered inappropriate or difficult for the social norms of the time. A former orderly at the Westbrook Institute interviewed in 1968 remembered, "There was a patient on the third floor who was kept separate from the others. The staff called her the burned lady. Her face and hands were badly scarred and she spoke very little. What was unusual was that she received regular visits from men who didn't seem like family, more like doctors or businessmen. They would spend hours with her, often bringing unusual equipment. We were told she was part of an experimental treatment program for burn recovery." Dr. Calloway wrote this last note in 1968, just before his research materials were put away. The story of Eliza Thornwood is not just a historical curiosity, it is a warning. When power and truth clash, truth rarely survives intact. What happened in Devil's Den in 1904 was systematically erased. First, by discrediting a witness, then by the convenient deaths of all involved, and finally, by the physical destruction of evidence. What remains is a void in the historical record, a silence where a woman's testimony should be. Lake Fort Smith, which was made by damming the Frog Bayou in the 1,950 seconds, now covers most of the area where Devil's Den used to be. The highest points of the ridge around it, like the limestone bluffs near where the Thornwood house stood, are still above water and can only be reached by boat. When local fishermen go by certain spots on the lake after sunset, they sometimes see something strange. Depth finders, radios, and even battery-powered lights stop working for a short time before starting up again. Engineers say that this is because mineral deposits in the underwater landscape mess up electrical signals. Some older people, on the other hand, say there is another reason. They say that what Eliza Thornwood saw and what those men were doing in that abandoned mine caused a disturbance that goes beyond the physical remains that are now hidden under the water. Eliza herself might have called it a ripple in the natural order. A retired doctor from Fayetteville gave Dr. Calloway's research a scary new angle in 1965. The doctor, who asked to remain anonymous in the record, said, "During my medical training in Philadelphia in 1908, I came across references to experimental preservation techniques developed in a rural research facility in the Ozarks. The procedures involved methods for maintaining tissue viability outside the living body for extended periods, far beyond what was publicly known to be possible at that time. These techniques later formed the foundation for advances in organ preservation that became standard by the 1,940 seconds. The origin of this research was never properly attributed in medical literature, but those who knew spoke of it as the Arkansas method. I always wondered what price was paid for that knowledge." The doctor went on, "There were rumors in some circles about experimental surgeries done on people who didn't want to be there, people who wouldn't be missed, or whose disappearances could be explained away the rural poor, the mentally ill, and vagrants passing through remote areas. I thought these stories were just ghoulish exaggerations until I met a colleague who said he had taken part in the research. One night he got drunk and started talking about a mine in the Ozarks where they had conquered temporary death. He said they had found ways to keep cells alive in severed limbs for days instead of hours. This was impossible, according to the medical knowledge of the time. When I asked him for more information the next day, he denied the whole conversation and never spoke to me again." Dr. Calloway also found a partial inventory list from the Crawford mine that was dated May 1904. The list included things that are more common in a medical facility than in a mine, such as surgical tools, chemical preservatives, specialized glassware, and electrical equipment whose purpose was not clear. The letterhead on the document is from the Northwestern Medical Research Association, and it is signed by a Dr. W.T., who could be the unknown Wilson Thornwood mentioned in Harold's obituary. A geologist who looked at the area in the 1,950 seconds before Lake Fort Smith was built noticed that the Crawford mine had some strange features that set it apart from other mines in the area. He wrote in his report, "The excavation appears to have been done with a purpose beyond just extracting minerals. Several chambers have been carefully enlarged and reinforced, with evidence of wooden flooring and electrical wiring installation, unusual features for a mine of this era and purpose. Of particular note is a large central chamber, approximately 200 feet from the entrance, which appears to have been specifically designed as a workspace rather than for mining operations. Without further historical context, it is difficult to determine the purpose of these modifications. We probably won't ever know the whole truth about what happened in Devil's Den in 1904. The main people are long gone, the evidence is lost or destroyed, and the land itself has changed. What remains is a broken story, a pile of papers, testimonies, and obvious gaps that point to a dark place in the middle of the Boston Mountains." Dr. Calloway wrote in a private letter, "I have come to believe that Eliza Thornwood's greatest transgression was not that she saw too much, but that she refused to unsee it. In an age when women were expected to doubt their own perceptions when contradicted by men of authority, she maintained a fatal certainty. She knew what she had witnessed, and she was determined to make others see it too." It is possible that Eliza Thornwood did not die in that fire, but instead lived on to become a subject of the very experiments she had tried to expose. The entry for the patient registry, the mysterious Jane Smith with burns, and the moved patient at the Westbrook Institute all point to a story that is even worse than just dying to keep quiet. Dr. Calloway got an anonymous letter with a St. Louis postmark in 1964 while he was looking into the case. The letter, which was written in a shaky hand, only had this strange message: "The woman who saw too much still sees. Though her eyes are clouded now, they kept her alive to perfect their methods. What you seek lies beneath the waters now, but some secrets never truly drown." It was signed, "A Friend from Westbrook," but attempts to find out who sent it were unsuccessful. The waters of Lake Fort Smith are still today, covering the ruins of Devil's Den. People who visit paddle across its surface without knowing what might be below. The Crawford mine, the Thornwood house, and the paths Eliza took to collect her evidence are all gone from the landscape. They now only exist in broken documents and fading memories. But maybe some of Eliza Thornwood's truth is still out there, hidden in the few records that survived the planned destruction of her story. In 1904, her voice was completely silenced, but her diary still whispers, "I understand now that what I have seen will never be believed." History has shown that she was both right and wrong. People who lived at the same time as her didn't believe her and thought her testimony was just the result of hysteria and weakness in women. But over the years, bits and pieces of her story have stayed the same, which makes it seem like what she saw in that abandoned mine was real enough to make her keep quiet. In 1967, an old woman from Fayetteville gave a collection of her personal things to the Washington County Historical Society, which was the last piece of evidence. One of these was a leather-bound journal that belonged to James Simmons, the newspaper editor who died shortly after meeting Eliza Thornwood. His wife kept the journal safe until she died, and she never remarried. There is only one entry in the journal, dated the 25th of June, 1904, the day he met Eliza. It says, "Mrs. T brought evidence today that, if authentic, would implicate several prominent men in activities beyond the bounds of ethical medicine or natural law. The photographs are unclear but disturbing. Surgical apparatus in a setting that is clearly not a proper medical facility, and what appears to be preserved human tissues." She claims they are attempting to extend the viability of organs outside the body using techniques that violate all known medical ethics. I have secured the materials in the newspaper safe until I can verify her claims. If true, this represents not just a local scandal but a matter that may require federal attention. There are no more entries in the journal. 3 weeks later, Simmons drowned. It is said that his successor emptied the newspaper safe, and there is no record of what happened to the things Eliza gave him. Dr. Wilson Thornwood, Harold's supposed brother, went on to have an interesting career after this story. Dr. Calloway couldn't find any records of a doctor by that name, practicing in St. Louis in the early 1900s. However, his research did find references to a Dr. William Thornton, who started using new methods for preserving tissue in 1908. Before disappearing from medical literature around 1915, Dr. Thornton wrote a number of important papers on the subject. We don't know where he went after this time. In 1910, an obscure medical journal published one of Dr. Thornton's papers that said, "The advances described herein represent the culmination of experiments conducted over many years in isolated conditions, necessary for uninterrupted research. The techniques for extending tissue viability were perfected through trial and error in circumstances that afforded complete privacy and freedom from conventional constraints." In 1968, a former patient at the Westbrook Institute gave the last piece of the puzzle. The woman, who had been treated for nervous exhaustion in 1911, recalled, "There was a patient there who never mixed with the rest of us, a woman with severe burn scars. The staff called her the special case. One night, I became disoriented and entered the wrong wing of the building. I saw her sitting by a window, writing in a journal. When she noticed me, she beckoned me closer and whispered, 'I am Eliza Thornwood. Remember that name.' Before I could respond, an orderly appeared and escorted me back to my room. The next day, the woman was gone. When I asked about her, I was told there had never been a patient in that room. In the end, the most disturbing thing about the Devil's Den incident may not be what happened in 1904, but how well it was covered up. How utterly a woman's testimony could be invalidated, her evidence obliterated, her very being almost expunged from history. Eliza Thornwood saw too much. Until it was too late, no one believed her. And maybe it's still too late in some way. The truth is buried under layers of time, water, and willful forgetting. There are no records of what the Northwestern Medical Research Association did after 1904. It ended as quietly as it began, leaving only questions about what experiments may have taken place in that abandoned mine and what knowledge may have been gained at the cost of people who were not known. A final note from Dr. Calloway's research, dated just days before his funding was cut. I have been advised by university administration to pursue other research interests. My inquiries about Northwestern Medical Research Association appear to have touched nerves in unexpected places. Perhaps some secrets are still protected, even after 60 years. Perhaps some truths remain dangerous long after those who first concealed them have passed away. Some things, perhaps, are better left unseen. But Eliza Thornwood didn't have that luxury. She saw, and she spoke, and she paid the ultimate price for her refusal to remain silent. The waters of Lake Fort Smith are still dark and deep over the site of the events, and the ruins of the Crawford mine still hold their secrets somewhere below.